That's lobby. Lobby for your lobby gobblers. Here.
Welcome to what Tim Bobbin called the rigging of England, that it was so high up. We're east meets west. East Lancashire becomes West Yorkshire. And why are we here? Well, because we're going to look over a series of videos, and they're not going to be consecutive, as you can guess, about how the Rossendale coal industry really was the catalyst of the cotton and textile industry really booming in this area. Now, we think of the coal industry and the Industrial Revolution, and we think perhaps in the mid-1800s, the mid-19th century, when we had big collieries going to the turn of the 20th century. But here, we're looking at a totally different thing. We're looking at small collieries, all up this valley, down in towards Todmorden, down Jules Gate. Jules Gate, now that means Devil's Gate. No, we ain't going to find Susie Quattro down there. But we do know they were mining for iron down there, or certainly had the rights to it in the 1300s. Now, if we look on our first proper reference visually, which is the 1844 map, and I know we've got maps before that, go back to Yates's map that shows coal pits over here, but that first Ordnance Survey is a fantastic map. It really shows everything in detail, and I just wish I could do things like a Disney Pixar film, you know, where we zoom in on the map and then everything becomes one big animated scene, and we end up in an actual film scene in a Dickensian London. Well, we're not Disney. Perhaps we can get Disney to lend us Mickey Mouse for a video, but I'd love to be able to do that, because the 1840s were a really interesting time. Not that you'd want to live there, and not that you'd want to be in Bacup at that time when you look at the public health records. But when you look at that map, look all the way up Sharneyford Road, up Sharneyford Brook, down into Jules Gate, and you see quite a lot of coal pits, collieries, and most of them are named. Now, we know they're only small pits. Many of them would have been worked by a horse gin, so this valley would have been dotted with horse gins. We don't have many working numbers of how many men there worked, apart from an odd one. We average, I would think, 30 men, 20 men, 10 men. Certainly by the 1820s there were pits down there that were just employing 5 men on the pick, 5 getters. But it was the birthplace of the industry, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution up here. And if you look on that map, you see how much bigger and better developed Bacup is towards Rossendale, and it's because of the natural resources that were here. Now, if you take a look behind me, this hill, that's called Tutor Hill, and the history of that goes back, well, obviously it's been there since the earth was developed, we know that, but its history goes back a long, long way of inhabitation. They've found flint arrowheads up there, there's signs of Neolithic, if you believe in the Neolithic stuff, of that going on, and also of ancient farms. So Tutor Hill has been inhabited for an awful long time, and we certainly don't know the real history of it, but the name Tutor Hill comes from the word toot, to look. So Tutor Hill, and it has a fantastic lookout all down the Rossendale Valley towards the west, and then if you look east you're looking down towards Jules Gate, Todmorden, the Calder Valley there, and then down towards the south you're looking right over towards Rossendale. So you can have a right good toot. Isn't it a good job they didn't use the other word, sken? Otherwise we'd be looking at Skenner Hill now, Anyway, we'll go down and we'll have a look at the pits that we're going to look at and concentrate on today, which we've certainly got records going back. It's on the 1820 Scotland survey map, but it must go much further than that. Obviously, it's an establishment, but it's a little known colliery, an insignificant colliery in the scheme of things. Even in the Rossendale scheme of things, it's so insignificant. But it's got a rich history, and that is down the valley, and that's called Change Colliery, originally known as Higher Clough. So we're going to look at the three pits that was associated with it, which were Change Colliery, or Higher Clough, Lower Clough, and then a pit called Larwick, which traded in the 1860s as Greave Collieries Limited. And we've been struggling to find out which was Larwick. As you'll see at the beginning of the video, I'm putting a few hypotheses through, but I think I might have got an idea now which one it is. And I've done the video over a few different times, so there's more costume changes than an episode of Dynasty. So let's get down the valley to Change, and we're going to learn about also some really interesting people, some industrialists, but some real interesting families, and also some goings on that happened down in Change and Higher Change. So behind us here, these are the remains of what was the highest mill in England, possibly the highest textile mill, because obviously perhaps there were corn mills higher up, I don't know, but this was officially the highest sort of mill in England, and this was originally Heap Hay Mill and Sharneyford Mill, as it got known. And over the road is the old Wesleyan Chapel, and the chapel's really interesting because when it fell out of use being a chapel, it was adopted by George Hargreaves and Co, and they used it as a garage for their Ford and steam wagon. They had a steam wagon that led coal away from Sharneyford Colliery, and it was garaged in there because the pit's just down here. But it came to grief, and I'm not sure if it wasn't over Julesgate it came to grief. I've got the newspaper report on it, but anyway, it's been nicely done up now into a house. This is the site of the Sharneyford Colliery. It dates, we're not going to talk about it much today, it's a subject of its own, but it dates from just before the First World War. George Hargreaves came in to try and work they did work the upper mountain mine from here. They were going to have a go also at the Union, but it didn't really work that, and they got the coal from Old Meadows. So a lot of money was spent here, brick arch tunnels and everything. It employed maybe 30 odd men working the upper mountain, and sadly it came headlong in contention with the depression of the 1920s and 30s, and that's what basically saw it off. Although there was chance of a resurgence here in the 1980s when Burnley Bill, that's Brian Taylor, and Brian Newsom actually applied to reopen the coal, and boy, didn't that cause a stir amongst the Bacup Moors Action Group. They went mad. It got nowhere, off the ground, sadly, rightly or wrongly. But anyway, this is Sharneyford Colliery. And I did get the chance to go in it in the 1980s when it was still accessible, and a lot of it was still in situ, because Burnley Bill, Big John and Brian Newsom, they managed to get in and have a look, but sadly, well, I decided to spend the afternoon with a young lady instead, a pretty young girl. I've got my priorities a bit better these days. Anyway, this was Sharneyford, we'll talk about it on another day. But it is interesting, before we leave the site, Sharneyford Colliery is next to the bus stop. And me and Ronnie were talking the other week about whether the placement of the bus stop has anything to do with the pit being here. I think also across the road there was the mill as well. That was where Sharneyford Mill, Heap Hay Mill was. And the next bus stop along is Hilltop Colliery. You can still see the platform, the bed that it was built on. Looks like a massive 10-bob bit. And then the next one further along you get into Clough Head, where the brickworks were, and the going across the Templars collieries over there. But quite interesting, the bus stops, how they play along with the history as well. But there's another piece of history just across the road. Another legend, maybe not as deep as the one about the Dean boys going missing. Obviously there's no lives involved, but amongst historians in the Rossendale Valley, and certainly the Rossendale coalfield, is the old Acre Oil Colliery, which, as legend went, they were robbing coal belonging to Hargreaves or the Duke of Buccleuch, really, to be honest. And to prove that they'd actually done that, they were supposed to have sunk a shaft and proved that they'd crossed the Sharneyford Brook and pinched the coal. And the ensuing case was that the cost of sinking was put on the owners of the pit that had poached, and that cost sent them bankrupt. But nobody's ever really known which exactly Acre Hole is, or Acre Hole, even the derivation of the name. And again, it's one of those old man's tales. But behind us, you can see those buildings. Well, in the late 1950s, a drift was put down there into Old Meadows Colliery. Really, they brought the plan up that they'd had for Sharneyford, work in the Union Mine. So they put a travelling drift in there in the 1950s, also to cut down travelling time from Old Meadows because it got so far away from the entrance in Burnley Road. But there was an air shaft there, and they dropped the compressed air pipes for the new compressed air windy picks that they were using down the old shaft. And from things that we've looked at, it looks like that could be the original Acre Hole Colliery, because it is on the 1844 map as colliery. And at the bottom of the shaft, there was a furnace and a little cabin with a date on 1865 and some initials, like maybe the fireman's put his initials on and the date. So that pit goes back to the 1840s, but we've found something out since. But again, we'll leave that and probably talk about it when we discuss the Mills and Blue Ball Colliery. Now, if I've got the geography right, reading the old maps right, I think this is roughly the site of the old Change Colliery. But things have changed. It was originally known as Higher Clough. Originally, there was Higher Clough and Lower Clough. And this patch of land was owned by Whitworth Chapel. And this changed its name from Higher Clough to Change Colliery when George Maxwell took it over. And he run Greave Clough collieries, which was Higher Clough, Change, and then Larwick. Well, there's a shaft at the other side of the road as well that I've never found, and we've never fully understood which Larwick colliery was. Whether it's the one further up that's marked as a ventilation shaft, or Larwick is over there. Perhaps we'll never know. But anyway, this has all been landscaped, but this is the basic area that Change Colliery was. Now, I must admit, I don't know Sharneyford that very well, and this area of Bacup very well as well. We didn't spend much time up here as kids, for certain reasons, because I'm now looking for where Lower Clough was. Say Maxwell, he had Change, which was the old Higher Clough colliery, and then the Lower Clough colliery. And both pits are also on the 1820 Scotland survey map, because this then was Scotland, part of Rochdale rather than part of Rossendale. And it shows the Lower Clough, if I'm right, reading the map, just down here, you see. And this land would belong to Whitworth Chapel. There was a narrow patch of land that run right up either side of Sharneyford Brook, which was their royalty, and Maxwell and others leased their coal off them. To the other side of the royalty, you kind of had Greave Colliery, the main Greave Colliery that worked right across towards Britannia and right up to Tutor Hill. And I don't know who owned that royalty. So anyway, let's see if we can find anything down in the bottom, because a couple of water looses came out of here as well. There was one from the Lower Clough colliery came out, and later Brookside colliery, which was in the 1920s, 1930s, didn't run very long. But think of the name Brookside, next to a brook. And then there was another water level that came out from the other side, the Bull Hole end over there, and going up Sharneyford Road. Old Meadows tapped into that, but it goes through the old, well, it looks like the old Greave Clough colliery workings as well. It might be down in the bottom here, we'll have a look. Well, now I've got my bearings a little bit, so I can get us right to where the Change pit was now. This is Old Doles, and there was a pit. Obviously it's on private land, so we can't go and have a look. Maybe try and get permission to see if there's anything left. But there was a shaft just up on here. Now that looks like it was connected with the Change colliery, and it could be part of his Larwick. Like I said, there was Change, Lower Clough and Larwick that became part of what was known as Maxwell's Greave Clough collieries. Greave Clough collieries, sorry. Although they stretched back a lot further than that, they were working before the 1820s. So that's going to be up there. We'll nip across the road now and see if there is anything left of the old Change colliery, because I know now exactly where it was. So this is roughly the area where Change shaft would have been, and if you look, you can see there's an extra fenced off area here. And if you look on the 1844 map, it's just by the side of this road here to New Barn Farm, the bottom road into New Barn, just here, and you've got this fenced off area. Now John said it was, forget how deep, but he said it was square lined with wood. And we've got a good description of the pit from a sale when George Maxwell sold it. So maybe it is still remaining. I got a bit despondent to think I've missed it by 50 odd years. Well, this could actually be the shaft here. See, keep searching, you'll find. So what is that in the bottom? Is that Brookside? Was Brookside further down? Is that water coming out of the Change workings? Is there a bit of a water loss out the pit and into the brook there? But it certainly looks like there's been a bridge across, doesn't it? We'll find out more. Kind of got to be the old pit, really, Andy. Why would you fence it off just like this? But obviously the rest of the pit top has been well landscaped. We know they did have a steam boiler here, steam winder. It was a full Monty. So, and all this park's been built up on it, and it. Anyway, Change Colliery, or Higher Clough as it used to be known. Right, so what have we got down here then? And all down the side of the brook here, it's all red iron water, all car, and there's the remains of what's looked like an old bridge across. Now I can't find at home, I had a map that showed the Brookside workings on, and I wondered if the old Brookside went into the old Lower Clough pit. Now, we also found in the records, I'm not sure if Steve might have come across it actually, going way back to the 1700s, putting a water level in to come out into Sharneyford Brook here, and that possibly could have been the origins of roundabout Lower Clough here. There's definitely been something. You can see it all up, and it's all built up with dry stone as well. It isn't natural. So I'll have to have a route round and find if I can find this map that shows Brookside on, and familiarise myself a little bit better with the area. So it's obvious really there's been a lot of mining activity here, and if I'm not near the old Lower Clough and the old Brookside, I'm certainly near something. Now this looks like it was the Lower Clough. Now it says private land up there, so I've tried to find out whose land it is and I cannot, so I do apologise. But it looks like the Lower Clough are down in the bottom here, just on that side there where that rough ground is. Obviously it's totally obliterated now, isn't it? Look at that bank, how that bank's all got away. There's really lots of really deep car water there. Like I said, we're looking for an old level as well that goes back into the mid-1700s. Got the date written down somewhere, I think. But it just goes to show how far back mining goes in Greave Clough. There's plenty of car water. It really is hard to tell exactly, because it looks like the course of the river has changed as well. So it's all guesswork. And I don't know if Lower Clough was a shaft or a drift. We know there was a drainage level down here somewhere, and we know that Templies went in the 1950s and worked that area again. But maybe Lower Clough was a drift because it's down further on the outcrop, lower down on the outcrop than Change. And Change shaft was only maybe 100 foot deep or so. Now when you get up a height, because I thought, is it in that field above? But maybe it's not. It's hard to tell on the map. But when you look down, this area here, I'm just going to show you in a sec, looks like it could have been a drift portal, like it's been hollowed out. I'm not saying it is. This is just a lot of guesswork. Like I say, maybe some people can help us we might know a little bit more about the area and remember it maybe from 40, 50 years ago. I know Steve Oz does because he came up and down here loads of times. And I'll show you what could possibly be the place. It's running in here. Obviously would have gone that kind of direction. And when you look from above, it really does look like there's a bit of a scoop out of the middle. But on the first OS map, it doesn't show these bends in the river. But what it does show with the location of the pit, where a road comes down from the top, down to Flowers Mill, and it's sort of on the opposite side of the brook, at the bottom of that road. And that's the tributary brook that comes down from up towards in front of New Barn. So this must be the area. Anyway, we've had a look. Early days yet, we're bound to find out a little bit more. If I'm not mistaken, here's our old water level. Oh well. So as we come back in the summer, it's just a total nettle fest here, all overgrown. That's where the pit was, where those nettles are. And it's hard to think there was such a hive of activity here, wasn't there? You know, a 60-foot chimney, brick buildings, boilers going, clatter of coal, winding cage coming up and coal being pulled out of the cage, all the noises that went on with the pit, and now it's just silent and quiet. But who were the owners of the Change Colliery or Higher Clough? How far back can we go? Well, we can only go back to the 1820s or thereabouts, and it seems John Lord was then the owner, and if I'm right, my memory's got me right, he had 5 getters working here. And he also owned the Lower Clough as well. A getter, obviously, is a collier, and he was paying poor law on that. That's how we know who was working here. And I'll put up how much he had to pay in poor law. Now, who was John Lord? Here's the question. We've got 2 working theories. First working theory is it was John Lord of Cown, who, along with Lomax and Dearden, took the collieries off of Byron. Possibly was him. Now Ben Hardman's been looking into a John Lord from over the Todmorden side who were manufacturers. They owned lands up on Tutor Hill as well, but we're still looking into it. So which one of them was it? We just don't know. And it may have been neither of them, but we're working on it. The John Lord of Cown, he was uncle to the Buxtons who had the mill there at Levensgrave. Now then, according to Jack Nadin, Abraham Mills was running the pit in the 1830s. Now the Mills we do know something about, and we're trying to gather a lot more information. The first reference we have to Abraham Mills is 1819, when his son Joseph was born. So we've found the baptism records for that, and Abraham is down as a collier. Now on later censuses he's down as a publican, and on later baptisms a carter. But he's never down as a coal owner, but it looks as though he must have leased the colliery here in the 1830s. And the Mills, certainly his sons Joseph and Benjamin, they later ran the Blue Ball Colliery. So we'll talk more about the Mills family when we discuss that. Now the main owner of here was, in the 1840s, was James Butterworth. Now, there's very little information about James Butterworth apart from the fact that he was a cotton spinner, and he had a mill. Well, he was from Whitworth, but his mill was also at Cown. According to Mike Rothwell, it was the old engine at Cown, and then they moved to Bridge Mill as well. Not the bridge mills that Rossendale built, but Bridge Mill in Whitworth, and the factory got took over by his son. And when James died, it then comes up the name of the colliery as the Exers of James Butterworth, and he also run Oaken Clough Colliery as well. Now during his tenure there was a death here, and the death was in 1846, and it was young James Mills, and he was only 18. Was he related to Abraham? I haven't been able to find that out. It certainly doesn't seem to come up on the census as that, and there's that many mills, it's hard to discern. But a big stone weighing about 7 pecks fell flat straight on him and killed him outright, which is very sad. Now I'm not sure there wasn't another fatality here as well when somebody was taking pillars. I'll have to check my notes again. But that was the Butterworths, and I haven't got an exact date for when the Butterworths left off working, but Maxwell was certainly working here. He took over after the Butterworths in the 1860s, and as I said, he worked the Greave Clough collieries here, Larwick and Lower Clough. So Maxwell run them then up until the colliery closed. As far as we know, Change Colliery closed in 1874 when the plant was put up for sale. So, who's George Maxwell? Well, it appears that George Maxwell, and I say appears because I can't be 100%, you can't with the censuses. George Maxwell looks to have been born in 1828 on Dearden Gate, Haslingden, the son of a butcher. Now we do know for sure that he came to be a pawnbroker. That's how he started off in business. Mike Rothwell writes that down, but there's something interesting out the paper where he was diddled. There was a Mrs. Sharp, forget her name, Mrs. Sharp anyway, and she went up to Mrs. Maiden on Todmorden Road, and she said, I've got an uncle in Clitheroe and he's died, and I'm that poor, I've nothing decent to wear for the funeral. Could I borrow that black dress and that black skirt, please, for the funeral? So obviously she must have known her. And Mrs. Maiden, she gave it her. She lent her the skirt and the dress, which Mrs. Sharp then immediately took to George Maxwell's pawn shop and pawned and cleared off with the money. And she wasn't found for some considerable time. I think it was about 6 months, must have been at least, before she was found. And she got fined at least 20 shilling. I'll tell you exactly how much she got fined. She got fined 20 shilling and costs, and if she failed to pay, well, she'd be up in the House of Correction in Preston. But the pawn money she got was 5 shilling 9pence. That's how much she got for the dress. And apparently, this was the second occasion that her uncle in Clitheroe had died, and she put up a subterfuge. So we know that Maxwell certainly was a pawnbroker. And then obviously he came into the cotton trade and he took over Vale Mill and the colliery. Obviously it was to provide coal for the mill, and he got into brick making as well. So that is who George Maxwell was. But interestingly, he married into the Maiden family. You know, the Maiden family, Maiden Park, Maiden Bass. He married one of the sisters there of the, was it John Maiden, the original one? I'll put it up. He married into that family, so that's who Maxwell was. And perhaps he got sponsored in business through that connection, I don't know. But there's another story about old dolls across the way that helps paint a picture of the colliers round here and the times round about the 1870s. And it was 1874, part of the poor law, the Jacksons, there were at least 3 brothers who were colliers, and they lived across the road at Old Dolls, you know where I said the other shaft for changes. And they were sort of put up before the Poor Law Committee in 1874 for their father. They weren't helping contribute looking after the father, so they were made to come up with costs for the father. This is the remains of where Vale Mill was here. This was actually the boiler house, so a lot of the coal from Change would have come. We've had a look in the brook to see if we can find the water loose. So, certainly looks like there's one, but whether we can actually see the one coming down from Old Dolls is a different thing. Maybe, maybe not. On the 20th of October 1867, a really serious incident took place here. Well, it took place at the Hit or Miss Beer House up there. I can't film in front of it, it's a bit rude. It was then run by Matthias Stott. Now, PC Richin, he was an old policeman and he'd been in the force for over 15 years up here. He was stood outside the beer house when they were turning out, around about 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. And 10 or a dozen guys came out, worse they were for drink, most of them, and split different ways. But two of them, one of them was named John Cropper. His dad owned the Blue Ball, or the Bull and Dog Inn, further up. And the other was James Mills. He was a young collier. They were both colliers. And they came across the road and wanted to know what the policeman was on with. One guy went up to PC Richin and said, well, he asked him politely, sarcastically, what time is it? Well, what else you do? Always ask the policeman the time, don't you? At that point, Cropper had come across and he was sort of sarcastically grinning in the face of PC Richins. Now, the other guy turned and walked off up the road, and PC Richins followed him. And Cropper and Mills were in close pursuit. So he set off walking up the road from the Hit and Miss, and as he did, it was Cropper that shouted, "Be careful, he'll rob thee!" Well, the guy walking up the road, whose name we don't know, said, "He'll not bother me." Anyway, he carried on up the road, followed by the policeman, till he reached this particular point, and this is where the action happened. This was the Bull and Dog Inn. Its name later changed to the Blue Ball, although the original Blue Ball pub was the old Blue Ball Hall across there, which has, as far as I think, a lot of connotations with the Mills family, connections with them. But the Bull and Dog dates from 1792, according to Wendy Ann at Bacup Natural History Society. And it was run from the 1830s by John Cropper, who we were interested in, and previous to that, his father James had it, but Cropper ran it all the way through to the 1870s when this incident took place. He was landlord and his son was one of the aggressors. Let's have a closer look. Now, according to Joan, who now owns it, these were the steps where the egg place is going up to the front door of the pub. It was, as you know, just turning out time, because that's why the hit or miss had closed. So by the time they got here, the doors were just closing and being locked. But anyway, Constable Richins, he hung round to see what was going on. It does appear that he had a bit of a bee in his bonnet looking for trouble up here. That's what could be going on. But anyway, he stood here for 5 minutes and the people came out the pub, they split, went the different ways, but one man was hanging around. After about 5 minutes, Constable Richins said to him, "Isn't it about time you were going home?" At which, by that time, Mills and Cropper were very close. The guy turned round to him and said, "Go home, I'll get you go home down there." And he turned on him, and at that moment, Cropper dealt him a violent blow on the side of his face, and another guy who got away struck him on the other side of his face, so he got a quick 1-2. He fell to the floor, drew his truncheon, but as he drew his truncheon, they all came in on him, and he managed to strike one of them with a truncheon, but then his truncheon was taken off him. They seized it, and he was on the floor with 3 or 4 on top of him, giving him a right good kicking. As it continued, Constable Richins managed to get his hand up and just grab hold of his truncheon and try and snatch it back. At which time another guy went in on him and Cropper shouted, "Go on him, get into him, rotten soul, kill him!" Now at this point, Constable Richins started shouting murder, and his voice was heard by James Clegg and his wife, who lived 200 yards up the road. And they were roused out of bed because they'd been in bed since about 9 o'clock with all this fracas going on, and were looking out of the window. And James Clegg opened the window and shouted out, hey up, are you trying to murder somebody? Bit of a funny thing to say. You're going to say, yeah, we are. Mind your own business. But that startled them and they started to run. Now, James said all he could see was like a heap on the floor. He thought it was like a dead horse or something. That was obviously Constable Richins. And when he got there, he was in a really bad way. So it was James Clegg and his wife that dragged Constable Richins back into the house. Now, John Cropper was quickly arrested. They picked him up at 1 o'clock in the morning. He was at his mother-in-law's, the Bull's Head Inn. But they didn't get to Mills, although Mills lived quite nearby. Obviously, we know the Mills are associated with the old Blue Ball Hall, but it's a big family. But they picked him up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It said he was just stood there, standing up in his shirt with blood all around him. And you kind of think, was he getting up for work? You know, because you'd have to be up for work at such a time. But they got them, and off they went to Preston, to the assizes. Now then, some of them got away and they weren't caught for a long time, but 6 months later, one of them, Hamer Mills, again another young collier from here, he was picked up in Rochdale because he committed another offence, and his name came up and the Rochdale police brought him across here, and again he was sent to Preston for trial. And I think some of them got at least 6 months in jail, which wasn't a lot for such a serious assault on a policeman. It's also, I forgot to mention there, John Cropper, the senior, his dad, while they were up in court, he took a fit, and it caused a lot of distraction in the court, and it was quite a while before they could carry on. He took a really bad fit at what his son had. Maybe that's because of what his son had done. Now, John Cropper, the landlord, he's mentioned earlier, about 10 years before, because a cart, he obviously owned coal carts as well, and one of his carts carrying coal coming down the road here run over a child. I'm not sure if John was driving it or not. A young 3.5-year-old kid got run over, and John Cropper did everything he could to stop, but he couldn't, and the cart went right over the little one. And funnily enough, even though when he got off the cart he thought he was going to pick the young one up lifeless, the young one recovered. There was hardly anything wrong with him. So it's good when we put different things together and try and put what we can together about the different people, isn't it? So this is the road across to the brickworks, Parrots Brickworks and the Blue Ball Colliery. Like I say, there's nothing left of it today, but over the road is where the Bull and Dog, or the Dog and Bull was, which became known as the Blue Ball Inn, and that's where young John Cropper and one of the Mills nearly kicked the policeman to death. It's just over the road here, not there anymore. So this is the site of Blue Ball Colliery, and it's a little bit of an enigma. I don't know if that's the correct word, because there's no proper plans of it. There is at the upper mountain mine, but not the proper bottom bed, lower mountain. And sometimes it appears with two owners in the same year on the inspector's reports. So it leads us to the fact there's two different collieries by the name of Blue Ball. But we know that, well, James Butterworth certainly had the Blue Ball as he was running Change Colliery, but we'll talk more about his tenure here at Blue Ball when we talk about Blue Ball itself and the mills. But just the other side of that gate there is where the brickworks were, Parrots Brickworks, also known as Blue Ball Colliery, because basically that's in the upper mountain mine seam and this is in the lower mountain seam, and they work the same royalty, the same landowner, if you will, because all these different pits here all have different landowners. That's a good thing about this area, other than when we look at the Duke of Buccleuch's land, where Hargreaves were the sole occupiers. Up here, down in Whitworth and up on Rulymore, you've got lots and lots of different owners. Sometimes, yeah, they're mill owners, entrepreneurs, but other times they're groups of normal working men that have got themselves together, saved up enough brass and bought the pit, or leased the pit they were working in. And that's what makes it such an interesting area. But anyway, that's where the Brickworks was, through there. Now then, we discussed Larwick Colliery. Now Maxwell, as we said, got into financial difficulties quite a few times, but in 1874 he kind of, as we said, Vale Mill was sort of put up for sale, but he didn't buy it back. He went into partnership with somebody else under a different company name, it appears, off reading up Mike Rothwell. But the colliery, Change Colliery, Lower Clough Colliery, Greave Clough Collieries and the Brickworks all went up for sale. And one sale says 1874 Greave Clough Collieries for sale. 3 collieries. The collieries known as Greave Clough. So we know that at that time he was running Lower Clough, although it seems that Change was the most important. He was running Change, Lower Clough and Larwick. So Larwick must have been probably Parrots here, the Brickworks, the upper mountain, because he was running that colliery. He was getting the clay out of it and getting the coal out of it as well. So that's where possibly the Larwick pit was. And he sold it in 1870, well, it went up for sale in 1874. I'll give you some particulars of the sale. So this then is the Parrots Colliery, sometimes known as Blue Ball, but very possibly, quite probably, the Larwick that we've been looking for. And it's into the upper mountain mine. There's at least 2 drifts, you can see them as depressions, and another plan shows another drift in the middle of the area, but further back this way. Now then, obviously, George Maxwell was into his brick making, wasn't he? So he ran the mill, he ran Change Colliery, Greave Clough Collieries, and he ran the Brickworks here as well. So he was quite a big employer. So according to the 1871 census, Maxwell was employing around about 270, 280 hands down at Vale Mill. The pit was employing 20, so that was kind of between Change Colliery and whatever he was doing up here at Blue Ball. And the Brickworks employed 13. And we know Maxwell was working certainly underground in the lower mountain up here, because there is a plan that shows him getting pillars out from under the lane here, Blue Ball Colliery Lane and the brook. But whether he worked the shaft here, I don't know. He might have taken that over off Butterworth as well. We just don't know yet. So at the Brickworks as well, he had actually, a few years in the 1870s, he patented a dry brick making machine. And that was capable of producing 780 dry bricks an hour. He got a patent on that. So he really put a lot into it, but sadly, everything went sort of sideways around about 1874, or that's when everything hit the fan, because everything had to go up for sale. Well, most things had to go up for sale. So Vale Mill went up for sale, although it seems like a new company took over, according to Mike Rothwell, and Maxwell was part of that new company. The colliery, Change Colliery, was put up for sale, and as far as I know, Change itself closed. It never reopened. Now the Brickworks went up for sale, and it looks possibly like the mills could have purchased the coal mining rights, because they're on a plan up here that the great Joseph Dickinson shows. But also somebody else, and the name escapes me, was working up here at the Brickworks. But I don't think it ever run to the same extent that it did. So this is where it was. Now, who would think that there was a colliery and a Brickworks here now? You wouldn't have a hope of thinking, would you? And the farm itself, Parrots Farm, well, just after 1900s, in the first decades of the 21st century there, Absalom Whitworth, who in 1900 was living on Redishire Farm, or Whitworth Way, well, he got the farm, he rented the farm, and he reopened the pit. And he brought up a wife and family on the proceeds of the pit. I forget when he closed it. Was it the early 1920s? But he was certainly working it in 1912 anyway. So a long and varied history for Parrots here, and there is a story of a young lad whose name escapes me again. And this was in the 1890s. He was working up here, he was a drawer, but I think he came from Aslington, and he got some powder in his pocket. You know, the black powder? And he was bragging to his mate he got some black powder from the pit where he worked, but it exploded in his pocket. You can imagine what that did. It didn't blow him up, because black powder, it sort of ignites, so give him severe burns and put him in what's now the hospital or the workhouse. So what does the sale say about Parrots Brickworks? Right, I'll have to read it. So the sale in May of 1874. Parrots Brickworks made they made common brick, chimney pots, fire brick, arch bricks, fire bricks. There was a brick and tile making shed here as well. Well, more than one by the sounds of things, and a brick and tile kiln. We've talked about his patent brick maker, haven't we? And they had a horizontal steam engine of 16 horsepower made by Bolton's of Ashton-under-Lyne. So that was the plant that was comprised here. But what was at the pit? So just imagine we were back at the pit and try and visualise it, what there was down there. That again went up for sale on exactly the same day. All the buildings were made of brick. There was a coal stayed there, and the chimney was going on for 60 foot high. It was quite a bit of a thought, that, to think 60 foot high chimney down there. A vertical steam engine of only 8 horsepower for winding with a reversible motor with an upright steam boiler attached. There was also an egg end boiler of £100 per square inch maximum pressure, and this gives us a clue. It said there was a winding cage with headstocks, so that leads us to believe there was just one cage in the shaft. There wasn't two, there was just the one. I'm presuming there were wooden headstocks as well, and there was a timber built warehouse. So that was what went up for sale at Change, and probably it was just the machinery and gear that was bought. But he wasn't just selling that as well, because other items went up for sale. From Vale Mill, 4 excellent strong draft horses, well known in the neighbourhood for their working qualifications and sound constitutions, their power, symmetry and size. Of course, symmetry and size. And they were known as Duke, Robin, Britain and a mare called Fanny. And also there was 6 coal carts for sale, probably that transferred the coal from Change down to Vale Mill. On top of that, he was selling a few items from home as well, which again is quite sad, because there was 2 first-class carriage horses, Alice and Polly, and a handsome silver Burham carriage. I think that's how you pronounce it, I could be wrong. Burham carriage built by Coburn of Manchester. It had a circular front, it was lined with wood, and a superfine green cloth was inside it. Silver mounted lamps. A silver mounted wagonette was for sale as well, and 1 silver mounted double. I can't pronounce this. Is it Phaeton? P-H-A-E-Ton. Phaeton. I'll put your picture one up. So also he was selling his Jag and everything as well, wasn't he? So he must have been desperate for money at the time. So it's quite sad. But that wasn't the end of the story, because he went out of business good and proper, bankrupt 3 years later, and then the house went up for sale. So George needed a new venture because he wanted to continue with his brick making. So he purchased the old Lane End colliery there in Bacup, which worked the sandrock mine, and he worked it for coal and he worked the clay. Now he also set up a brickworks, just known as Maxwell Brickworks, and we're not 100% sure of that exact location, but it was probably where the pit was. And he set to building a new mill, Maxwell Mill, that spanned the River Irwell on a brick arch. Sadly, he never really got to use the mill, and it became the depot for the local board, later the council. And it survived for a long time. There's still bits of it there. He lived in Cliff House up Spring Mount, but again, everything had to be sold in 1877 for this bankruptcy. Everything was itemised, even his library in the house was itemised, and it showed that he even had a copy of Thomas Newbigin's History of the Forest of Rossendale. So it was sad for George Maxwell, wasn't it? Because he was a real trier. And what happened to him later on, I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out. So here we are then on the pit road into Change. It's interesting, isn't it, that up at Blue Ball we've got a pub at the end of the pit road, and here we've got a beer house, the Hit and Miss Beer House, which has quite a tale in the mining history. So as we're on about Change, we then go down to the Brookside colliery, because that's what we were looking for earlier on, isn't it, down by Flowers Mill. And it looks like where the Brookside colliery was, well, that is where Old Clough went in. on the side of the river where that tributary is. That is where it went in, and it used the old Change Colliery shaft here as an air shaft, and they worked just up the clough towards the Blue Ball on either side of the brook. But it didn't work very long, just from the part way through the 1830s to the 1930s to the early 1940s. But they converted Flowers Mill into, they put kilns and so forth in there. I'll tell you better, we look what Mike Rothwell's put, because he's done quite a good history, done a brilliant history of all the mills around here. Now then, but there was one interesting story that occurred at the Brookside Colliery to do with benefits fraud in September of 1939, as the Second World War was sort of breaking out. But just before that, en route, we'll just relate a story about the old Flowers Public House, the pub here behind us. Again in the 1870s, I think it was the 1870s, I haven't put the date, but it was in June anyway, on a Sunday. And the landlord then was John Sanderson. And again, the police must have been having wind that was after time going up, so they came up, did the police, around about 4:30 on a Sunday afternoon, and found people in the public bar drinking. Anyway, the police investigated, and a guy called Crabtree ran out the stables with a beer jug in his hand. So the police ran after him, and about 5 others came running out the stables as well. And there was quite a big fracas, really. So the police got one of them, who finally admitted that they'd been drinking after time. Although the landlady claimed that they were all from Waterfoot, and that they had a right to be there because they were travellers or something like that. Anyway, the police were having none of it and fined them a £5 and said, if this carries on, your licence is in jeopardy. But this is the road down to Flowers Mill, where Brookside Colliery was, and what they took over the mill. It was described in the paper in 1939 as a conspiracy of 5 men, but particularly, well, a few of them had been tried the week before, but this particular instance, it was John McDermott of 8 Oak Street, Whitworth, and he was working here, but he was drawing his dough at the same time, and they all had been. But up in court was there was an employment exchange in Whitworth at the time, Whitworth, which in itself, that's interesting, isn't it? And Mary McLean, she was the clerk there, and she said, yeah, he's been in here and he's claimed his dole to say that he wasn't working. And then Beryl Whitmore, who was the clerk for the Bacup Brick and Tile Company, she lived on Thorn Crescent, she said, yeah, and when he was signing on there, he was working here. So he admitted the offence. In fact, he'd been the least of the 5 offenders. And he'd wanted to pay the money back, but they wouldn't let him. They said it had to go to court, and they fined him 20 shillings plus a guinea advocate's fee as well. So that's the only newspaper thing I found of the Bacup Brick and Tile Company that run the Brookside Colliery. So that was the last reworking up here. Templays came back and have worked bits since down in the bottom, but apart from that, that has been the last coal working around here. But yeah, so doesn't the area have a very rich mining heritage? We look at the textile heritage, but underlying that is the rich coal mining heritage that really was the mother, in that it provided the natural resource at an affordable price to make those mills profitable, and many of the mill owners ran their own collieries to provide it as well. So anyway, thanks for watching the video, thanks for putting up with us, and we'll try and get a few more of these done up Sharneyford to show you in the future. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like it, like, share and subscribe and pass the word on. And thanks to Wendy Ann, thanks obviously to Ronnie, Mike Rothwell for that wonderful industrial history that he wrote, Jack Nadin for the information he's put down, and it was lovely to meet Joan off Heightside as well, and the information that she gave me. So thanks to everybody, and we'll catch you next time. Come on, Morgan.